America, a country with roughly 300 million people and 400 million guns. And it's a terrifying place. You can't even go to the movies or a grocery store without the threat of being killed in a mass shooting. Nowadays, nowhere is safe. At least you would think that from watching the news. There's a tendency for people to believe that violent crime is on the rise. However, statistics show that the opposite is true. In fact, not only is overall violent crime lower per capita, so too are mass shootings. There have been spikes periodically, but the public is actually safer than they were in the 90s. So what's the deal? Why do so many Americans have this perception? The media certainly plays a role. Mass shootings of the past were often only local stories that never made national headlines. The real issue seems to be that a higher percentage of these mass shootings are politically motivated, and those are exactly the stories that make it big. But with the rise of reporting of these incidents, many are making calls for gun control. Some will try to dismiss our fears of such by saying that they only want to take assault rifles, but few of them seem to know what an assault rifle even is. Assault rifles are fully automatic weapons, but thanks to our dear Ronald Reagan, any assault rifle manufactured after 1986 is outlawed for civilian use. This makes the assault rifles that are on the market only affordable to the very wealthy, and even then, they're only available through licensed NFA dealers, where the buyer has to pay tens of thousands of dollars, go through extensive background checks and questionnaires, be photographed and fingerprinted, and wait up to a year to receive the firearm. But many politicians want to go much further.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal.
I happen to believe, and I believe this for 30 years, that we should not be selling or distributing assault weapons in this country.
Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am, if it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
But calls for gun control aren't exclusive to the left. President Trump has proposed a red flag bill, reminiscent of 1984's Thought Police.
Collect not only the firearms, but any weapons in the possession
or
of that
might
individual.
take the firearms first and then go to court. Take the guns first, go through due process second.
This bill allows any individual to call the local police department and tell them that they believe their neighbor isn't fit to possess a firearm. With one phone call, police will march to your door and seize your weapons without a shred of evidence or due process. Laws like this already exist in 15 states and have led to the seizure of weapons for more than 2,000 citizens. Law-abiding gun owners have already been shot in their homes because of this legislation.
An Anne Arundel County man is dead after officers say he refused to give up his gun to police.
Officers shot and killed him at his home this morning, and that's where we're trying to enforce the new red flag law.
Even conservative Representative Dan Crenshaw supports this bill, along with another Trump proposal called the TAPS Act, which if enacted, would be even more invasive to our privacy than the Patriot Act. Special task forces across the country would spy on the entire town, sifting through texts, phone calls, internet activity, and social media messages. Their plan? To disarm, detain you, or put you on a watch list for future crimes you haven't committed. If this sounds a lot like the movie Minority Report, that's because that's exactly what it is. Surely this won't be abused, even though we've already seen a disturbing internet trend of anonymous callers phoning into the police to send SWAT teams to video game streamers for no reason at all. But isn't all of this unconstitutional? What about our Fourth Amendment right to be free from search and seizure without a warrant or probable cause? Or our Fifth Amendment right to due process? Or even our First Amendment right to free speech, once people have been self-censoring anti-government rhetoric out of fear of being put on a watch list? And of course our Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, some would say no to the latter at least because of this line: a well-regulated militia. But well-regulated meant something very different in 18th century English. It didn't refer to restrictions, it meant to be sufficient and in working order. So effectively, a militia strong enough to defend the citizenry from the state. And these militias aren't made of soldiers or police officers, they're made of normal citizens like you and me. These same people might also make the argument that people back then were shooting muskets. They couldn't have known what sort of weaponry we'd have today. But we had just finished fighting a war against the British Empire, our government. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to ensure that the people have access to the same firepower as our military. When our country was founded, any individual was allowed to have their own cannons and even attack ships. This was all in an effort to prevent a tyrannical government. Many would say that that's futile against the strongest military in the world, but it worked for rice farmers in Vietnam. Even today, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban have used guerrilla warfare to prevent a US takeover. Even putting this principle to the wayside, is gun violence really that big of a threat? Take 2017 for example, the highest year for gun deaths we've had in 4 decades, 40,000 to be exact. But the majority of those were suicides. Only 15,000 were cases of homicide, and that only accounted for half of 1% of the total deaths for that year. And only 1% of those deaths are from mass shootings. The majority of these mass shootings, and shootings in general, are carried out by handguns as well, not semi-auto rifles. Why should people fear going to a concert when your chances of dying are significantly more likely on your morning commute? No one's afraid of driving their cars. But does gun control even work? The government can't even keep drugs out of schools or prisons, much less off the streets. Many look to other countries overseas for answers, but what about our neighbors at the southern border? Mexico is some of the strictest gun control of any country. In fact, there's only one store in all of Mexico where you can purchase firearms, but that hasn't made them any safer. Their country has been overrun by illegal paramilitary groups and drug cartels. Even Australia's gun control hasn't done them much good, despite being the supposed pinnacle of gun control success. Mass shootings were never a major threat in their country, and after their gun buyback, the rates of shootings have maintained the same rate of decline. But contrary to popular belief, there's actually more guns in Australia now than before. However, considering it's highly illegal for Australian citizens to defend themselves with their guns in any measure, perhaps they're not the place to look to for gun control policy in America. They can't even carry knives or pepper spray in public. While we talk about this, I think it's also important we acknowledge the racist roots of gun control in America. The earliest forms of gun control in our country came about after the Civil War, to prevent blacks from arming themselves, leaving them vulnerable to lynch mobs and other attacks. And in 1942, FDR took weapons from the Japanese, Italian, and German Americans. Even the NRA of all groups pushed for gun control when the Black Panthers began arming themselves during the Civil Rights Movement. But gun control disproportionately harms black Americans even to this day. 56% of firearm offenders are black. And are we really going to tell black communities to rely on the police to protect them? Historically, the police have been some of the biggest oppressors of minorities. And with laws like the Red Flag Bill, we can expect many people to sick the police on black folks who aren't doing anything wrong. We already have racists calling the cops on families for grilling while black. No one is really anti-gun, they're just pro-centralization of gun ownership. The police that confiscate our weapons have guns, the military has guns, the Secret Service has guns. It's just you and me they want to see disarmed. And we already have over 300 federal gun laws and over 20,000 state gun laws. Of course, it goes without saying that any time a mass shooting happens, it's a terrible tragedy. But the fact of the matter is, we're no less safe now than in the past. And while many would say that people against gun control are callous, I think what's really callous is sucking the joy out of people's lives, stripping them of their rights, and making them fear their everyday life. These people neglect to acknowledge all the lives that guns have saved. Do they not care about people protecting themselves from rapists, burglars, or killers? Does it really seem sensible to give up our rights for 0.01% of our yearly deaths? The CDC estimates that anywhere from 500,000 to 3 million Americans a year successfully defend themselves with their firearms. That number dwarfs any wrongdoing they may cause. So, maybe America is a loaded gun. But maybe it should stay that way.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part. They're doing their part. Are you?